But Mace, we start with some news today from the Broncos that kind of came out of nowhere. Tom Pelissero, the NFL Network, reporting Courtland Sutton did not attend the voluntary workouts down at Dove Valley. He wants a new contract. Where were you, or what were you thinking when you heard this news this morning, Mace? A little bit of drama before the draft about the current roster and not a QB prospect.
Well, first of all, some are referring to it as a holdout. It's not. Okay. This is all voluntary. He's not missing anything but conditioning work, weight room work. So it's, in that regard, it's not a big deal. But in terms of kind of, what it's symbolizing here, it is a big deal. I mean, just a month ago, he was putting out the tweet of the gif of Will Smith standing in an empty living room at the end of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Yep.
Something that's become a meme for looking around and seeing everybody gone. And of course, at that moment, it was in the wake of trading Jerry Jeudy, of course, and changes coming and Justin Simmons being released. So a lot of changes coming at that point. You get it's certainly, it's a sign that he isn't happy. And honestly, if I'm the Broncos and he's coming in and saying, I want, whether it's a new contract or a raise or more guaranteed money, I'm looking at Courtland Sutton and saying, look, your body of work here the last couple of years doesn't warrant a raise. I would say I don't think he's really overpaid at this point. He ranks 21st in average annual contract value among wide receivers, and he's probably somewhere in the 20s to 30s in terms of where receivers are in this league at this point. But he hasn't had a 1,000-yard season since 2019. He had, after a year before having 10 touchdowns, he had 2 in the first year of this new contract that he got.
Correct.
Back in 2022. There isn't anything he's doing that warrants an adjustment in this contract on the positive side to his bank account.
Okay, so then let me ask you this, because I know you wrote a great piece about it at denversports.com today, and you broke down the numbers. It was really thorough. It was really well done. I would encourage people to go read it. I certainly learned a lot by reading it. But does he actually think, do you think deep in his heart of hearts, he thinks he deserves a new deal? Or do you think this is a ploy because he wants to get out of town? And he knows his most likely avenue to getting out of town is getting traded at some point in the next 10 to 12 days during the NFL draft. And is this a statement to the team, hey, you traded my friend Jerry Jeudy, you cut my friend Russell Wilson, Justin Simmons is gone, Cush is gone, Josie Jewell's gone, I'm the next veteran who should go? Is Courtland Sutton simply sending a message to Sean Payton and to some extent George Payton, I don't want to be here, so you might as well ship me out of town?
Yeah, give me more guaranteed or move on.
Right, but he knows he's not going to get that guaranteed. So because he knows he's not, it's like if you just make a silly threat, okay, well, the silly threat will hopefully get you moved. Like maybe this is part of a larger game of Courtland Sutton just trying to press the Broncos into trading him.
It's entirely possible. And look, there may be a team that would give him that. I mean, more power to him. I mean, maybe what you do, if you're the Broncos, you respond to this by saying, okay, if you want this, you want more, I mean, what's the harm in giving him permission to see if there's somebody out there? And you know what? The truth is somebody will give him more money.
Tied for 4th in touchdowns last year. That's going to be appealing, especially to a contender that wants another big body in the red zone, right?
Yeah. I mean, Calvin Ridley is a pretty comparable receiver. He's getting $23 million per year in average annual value.
Wow.
I'd argue based on the body of work, that's an overpay.
Yes, I would agree too.
And that's what the thing. You look at some of these contracts and you don't like, and Ridley, I'd say it's an overpay, but he is more accomplished. He's better across the board than Courtland Sutton. If I'm sitting there inside the Broncos, even if you view this as not a ploy to move somewhere else, if you view it as, okay, let's be earnest about this. I have a lot of trouble going higher than having him be the 21st wide receiver in average annual value. And that's only after the last couple of years of contracts have kicked in.
Yes.
I'd argue right now we're sitting here for a receiver who hasn't had a 1,000-yard season since 2019, has one 100-yard game since he started on this new contract in 2022, who in the 49 games over 4 seasons before this year had 10 touchdowns and then had 10 touchdowns this past year, which tells you that the 10 touchdown outburst is probably an outlier in the grand scheme of his career. I think his contract right now, in terms of the average annual value, I think it's perfectly fair. I don't think the Broncos should change a thing.
No, I don't either, and I don't expect they will. So let's flip this forward, Mace, and I'll just ask you the elephant in the room. Is Courtland Sutton a member of the Denver Broncos in 11 days when the NFL draft is over?
I would predict that he's not.
So you think this is the beginning of the end, and it's not one of those long, drawn-out beginnings of the ends. He will be moved, in your opinion. What could they get in a deal for Courtland Sutton, and could they use Courtland Sutton in a third to try to move up to the second and maybe draft a Michael Penix Jr. or a Bo Nix in the second round and leave with Brock Bowers and Penix, or Brock Bowers and Nix, as opposed to Brock Bowers? Or what's the realistic ceiling here? I'm just asking to move up one round. I'll give you my third in Courtland if you can get me to the second. Am I onto something, or what are you thinking?
Realistically, I think they would maybe need to go higher than that in terms of what they surrender. I mean, I don't know that value-wise on the market, Courtland Sutton is worth more than a fifth-round pick.
That's depressing.
And I don't. And a third and a fifth is not gonna get you to a second-round pick.
So I'm living in fantasy land, thinking that's their ticket to getting back up into the second round and getting Nix or Penix is some package involving Courtland Sutton, and you're telling me that's probably just not going to happen.
Well, let's just kind of look at the numbers here, okay? If we go by the Jimmy Johnson trade value chart.
Okay. Explain that real quick to folks. This is kind of the famous thing that all the GMs use, right? Okay.
Yeah, and there are multiple value charts. Teams keep these so they can kind of get a quick assessment in terms of a trade proposal. And so every pick has a point value number starting with 3,000 points in this model for the number 1 overall pick, all the way down to 1 pick for the most of the 7th round. Okay. So, I mean, it tells you those 7th round picks, they're basically, they are, they're 1 point. They're pennies, basically. They're nothing in the grand scheme of things. So pick number 76 is 210 points. Okay.
Okay.
The bottom pick in the second round, Kansas City at 64, is 270. That's the lowest pick in the second round. And I don't think, if you're thinking about Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr. falling to the second round, you're not doing that at the end of the second round. You're trying to get to the top of the second round in all likelihood if they've fallen out of day one.
Yeah, if they fall, they're going to go, 33, 34, 35, somewhere very quickly on Friday night.
Right. So the 76th pick is worth 210 points. The lowest pick in round 2 is worth 270 points. So you're talking about a 60-point difference. That's the equivalent of a middle pick in the 4th round, pick 117. So if Courtland Sutton's worth a middle 5th round, let's say it's a middle 5th round pick, that's about 30 points. That gets you only halfway from 76 to even the last pick of the second round, let alone where you probably would have to get, which is probably in those first 4 picks of round 2, which you're talking about making up a difference of 350 points in draft pick value, which is the equivalent of a mid to late second round pick.
Okay.
And Courtland Sutton is not that in value at this point.
Right. So it's just not going to happen. But you and I agree with you. I think Courtland Sutton has played his last snap in orange and blue, and I think he's out of town here in the next 10 days during the NFL draft, or maybe even right before. So you say maybe a 5th round pick for Sutton. You obviously get some money off the books in that case too. Do you think Sean Payton and George Payton are looking at this like, hey, we'll always take extra draft picks. Sure. If Team X wants to give us a 5th-round pick, that's enough. Because I think the average fan, Mace, and even, you and I, before we started having this conversation 13 minutes ago, I was hoping for a little bit more than that. But will the men inside the building making those decisions say, yep, we get rid of a little bit of money, we get a disgruntled guy off our team, and we get a 5th-round pick, we'll take it? A la similar to what they got for Jerry Jeudy. I know they got a 2nd pick for Jeudy as well.
You hit the nail on the head. They took the deal they could get for Jerry Jeudy at that moment. Now, unfortunately, you start looking back on the last 12 to 13 months with some regret if you move on from Courtland Sutton as well as Jerry Jeudy, because the trade rumors were running fast and furious a year ago regarding both of those players. And if you've already moved Jeudy, if you move Sutton as well, you are not getting as much as you could have gotten 12 months ago.
Yeah, it's a case of not pulling the trigger when they should have. George Payton's timing has never been a strength of his, and yeah, he should have pulled a deal or talked Sean into pulling a deal. I mean, Sean had just gotten here a month or so ago when those rumors started. All right, so let's look at the receiver room then, Mace. If you are trading Courtland Sutton, which you and I both believe will happen, now all of a sudden, I think receiver's a big priority in the upcoming NFL draft. They obviously need a quarterback. They need an edge rusher. They need a tight end. But where does receiver now rank in the list of priorities? And, I don't really think of Luke McCaffrey as the replacement for Courtland Sutton, but he's been a trendy name being tossed around. Does this mean if Sutton gets traded that all of a sudden we could be talking about, I don't know, a 3rd, 4th-round receiver coming to Denver?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, probably more likely a 4th-round receiver into day 3. I would also expect they'll potentially look at the open market as well. I mean, for example, another ex-Saint, you got a guy like Michael Thomas who's on the market. Right?
Oh, that's right.
He's
still out there, yes, kind of surprisingly. But you're right, he's still a free agent.
I'll throw some names out there that are still on the market. Hunter Renfrow, Allen Robinson, Odell Beckham Jr., Michael Gallup, Tyler Boyd, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Michael Thomas just mentioned, DJ Chark.
But these are how
there are guys. There are dudes out there that you can get to line up and play wide receiver.
Well, and these are household names because let's be honest, almost everyone plays fantasy football now. Every single name you just rattled off has been on my fantasy team or I've played against them at some point. That is a more robust market than I realized. Mace, including Tyler Boyd, is really still a free agent. I mean, I feel like he was good in Cincy with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. That one shocks the heck out of me.
Yeah, I mean, but part of the problem on Tyler Boyd is you look at him and he's going to turn 30 years old this year. He's going into his 9th season. So teams are looking at him and they see like last year his touchdowns were down, his success rate was down, his yards per catch were down. So they're looking at some metrics and saying, okay, this is probably a player in decline. He had his lowest average depth of target this past year. He actually saw his drop rate, unfortunately, go up from 3.7% in 22 to 5.1 in 23. So you have teams that are looking at Tyler Boyd and saying, okay, this is probably a player who is on the downside. But if you're the Broncos and you move on from Courtland Sutton, you're looking for some experience. You may be looking for some experience. You may be looking just for 1 year while you maybe take a day 3 wide receiver and let him develop. I mean, I'll cut 3 names that I like on day 3 that are going to be there, probably going to be there at that point in the draft. Malik Washington out of the University of Virginia, transferred from Northwestern, really stood out at Shrine Bowl practices down in Texas in January.
Okay, Malik Washington, that's one.
Yeah, like him a lot. Great at adjusting to the ball in flight. He can do some things short to intermediate, but he can also go deep as well. Luke McCaffrey, we've talked a lot about him. I know the sentiment would be strong. And one of the things I like about Luke McCaffrey is this is a guy, he's got a little background as quarterback, right? So he views playing receiver from a quarterback's perspective. I think that's something that could help him as he really continues to learn how to be a wide receiver. And then you get to round 7 in the priority free agent market. There's a guy the Broncos have had a visit with. That's David White Jr. out of Western Carolina. All the physical tools, really raw. I think is the kind of guy that needs some coaching up. As I was telling Cecil Lammy today, of course, Orange and Blue Today, weekdays, 4 p.m. on all the Denver sports social and digital channels. I was telling Cecil that with someone like David White Jr., I would have Tim Patrick basically be his designated mentor, and I'd tell him stick to Tim Patrick's hip,
Mm.
learn everything he does because White and his skill set, it looks a lot like Tim Patrick with a bit more speed to him. And I think he's the kind of guy that could grow and benefit from being around Timmy Pats. And maybe a year or two from now, you're talking about a guy who's a really reliable receiver who's got all the raw tools. It's just he wasn't really consistent during Shrine Bowl practice, and also he's making the leap from FCS at Western Carolina.
All right, those are 3 names to watch. I wrote them all down. I will keep an eye on those guys. We will keep you posted at denversports.com as this saga of Courtland Sutton should play out relatively quickly in the eyes of both Mace and I want to flip to some more Broncos, Mace. A new mock draft today from Peter Schrager of NFL Media. He has the team going defense with the number 12 overall pick next week. Would Sean and George really go that direction? According to Schrager, he sees the fit with the Broncos taking edge rusher. I'm going to let you say the name.
Laiatu Latu out of UCLA.
Laiatu Latu. I got to get that one down, especially if he's a Bronco. Laiatu Latu is by far the best pure pass rusher in this draft, 23.5 sacks with the Bruins over the last couple of years. We like Baron Browning. We like Jonathan Cooper. We like Nick Bonito. I don't think any of the 3 of them have future NFL star written all over them. Your thoughts on if it is Latu from UCLA, and would the fan base just be befuddled that they went defense in round 1?
I think a lot of fans would be befuddled, but I would say this: if the Broncos don't go quarterback, edge is the place to go. You rattled off the edge rushers the Broncos have. Baron Browning, Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito. What they have right now is the equivalent of a major league pitching rotation that basically has a number two starter as the number 1, a number 2 as the number 2, and maybe a number 2 as the number 3. So you're
but
like,
they don't have an
okay,
ace. They don't have an ace.
right.
Yeah.
You're like, oh wow, this rotation's got depth, and it does. Like you get down to the number 3, and they're of higher quality than most teams at their 3. But what they're missing is the ace at the top, the alpha. That's what they don't have in the room right now. Whether you're talking about Laiatu Latu or Jared Verse out of Florida State, these are edge rushers in the Broncos range at 12 that have that kind of alpha expectation where you go in saying, all right, it's not a question of if they're going to be consistently in double-digit sacks, it's when. I would think with Latu or Jared Verse, if not by year 1, as you get into year 2, you would expect 10, 11, 12 sacks a year from these players. That's what the Broncos are missing right now from that edge group, and that's what Latu could provide. Now, I would feel much better about this, Will, if the Broncos did have a second-round pick. That's the thing. The Broncos, they're sitting in this no man's land right now, where if they stand pat at 12, they're probably out of reach of the top 4 quarterbacks, but it may well be too high to take Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr., but they don't have that second-round pick, so what do you do? That's why trading down comes into a lot of discussions, but the problem is if you're in no man's land, our team's going to want to trade up to number 12 from the late teens, early 20s and allow you to recoup some of that draft capital and get a second round pick. You may not find a team that's willing to offer you what you want. That's the danger of this whole thing. It takes 2 to tango to make a draft trade, and it's possible the Broncos might be stuck picking at 12 and not picking a quarterback because no team gives them a fair offer to move up for number 12.
Well, I like your rotation analogy. That rotation with 3 number 2s would certainly be better than the rotation we have at 20th and Blake. There's no doubt about it. I'm not sure the Rockies have a single number 2. We'll get into Kyle Freeland getting hurt as a pinch runner as the show goes on. But let's handicap it like this, because you said if it's not quarterback, it's edge. Doesn't Brock Bowers change that conversation, though, too? Isn't he the other wild card in this if he's on the board at 12?
He is. Now, the thing you get into there is positional value, specifically contract value, because tight ends in general not highly paid compared to top-level wide receivers, for example. So in terms of overall roster building relative to the cap, I'm saying relative to like Sean Payton would.
There you go.
In terms of that, you're not. It's not necessarily the best play, but at the same time, you need a dynamic pass catcher. And maybe another one if Marvin Mims Jr. develops into a dynamic pass catcher. Bowers at 12, I think you're getting into the range where you say, okay, the talent is worth adding that player, even though it's not the best positional value to take a tight end at that spot in the first round. I think he's got top 5 talent. If you're looking at just every position, taking out the specific value of each position in the draft, if we're saying, okay, who are the most talented players in this draft? Brock Bowers is in the top 5. It's sort of like 6 years ago. Remember Quentin Nelson, the guard from Notre Dame?
Sure, yeah.
And it was a question of, do you take a guard in the top 10? Do you take him that high? Quentin Nelson has not disappointed as an Indianapolis Colt. He is putting together a Canton type of resume, which is no surprise to people who studied him coming out of Notre Dame. But he plays guard. That's not a difference-making type of position, and that's why positional value came into the debate. I mean, it'd be interesting to kind of look back and say, okay, if the Broncos didn't take QB, should they have taken Nelson rather than Bradley Chubb, knowing what we know now? It's fascinating, but at the time it was, okay, can you really afford to take a guard number 5 overall, even if he's got all this talent? I think when you get to pick 12 rather than top 5 pick, the equation changes a bit to where you say, okay, yeah, we can rationalize this, especially if you're talking about somebody that maybe you bring him in and you put him in space, you use him in that Joker role Sean Payton talks about, and you basically turn him into a weapon that goes farther than what the position tight end would reveal.
All right, we will keep an eye on it. I think all of these names are in play. In the meantime, we are on YouTube at Denver Sports. If you could find us, maybe like a video, comment, share, or subscribe, we'd appreciate it. Find us on YouTube at Denver Sports.